Corporal David Thompson adjusted his civilian jacket as he walked through the entrance of the Blackheath Military Shooting Club, a popular weekend destination for both serving military personnel and civilian enthusiasts. The 29-year-old soldier looked forward to these Saturday afternoons when he could escape the rigid formality of his duties as a Queen's Guard at Buckingham Palace and simply enjoy some recreational target practice in comfortable clothes. The shooting club was bustling with activity as various groups competed on different ranges, the sharp crack of rifle fire echoing through the indoor facility. David had been coming here for several months, usually keeping to himself and focusing on maintaining his marksmanship skills during his off-duty hours. Most members knew him only as a quiet, polite young man who seemed competent enough with firearms but rarely engaged in the boastful conversations that characterized many shooting enthusiasts. At the far end of the club, a group of 5 men had gathered around the precision rifle range, their expensive equipment and loud commentary drawing attention from other members. Led by Marcus Whitman, a wealthy businessman who collected military memorabilia and considered himself an expert marksman, the group had been dominating the conversation about shooting techniques and military training for the past hour. Marcus spotted David setting up at a nearby bench and nudged his companions, pointing toward the lone shooter. "Look at that fellow over there," he said with a condescending chuckle. "I've seen him here before, mediocre at best. Probably one of those ceremonial soldiers who march around in funny hats all day. I doubt he's ever seen real combat or had proper tactical training." The businessman's friends laughed along, their voices carrying across the range as they made increasingly disparaging comments about David's appearance and assumed lack of real military experience. They had no way of knowing that the quiet man, methodically preparing his equipment, had spent the previous 5 years as one of Britain's most elite special forces operators before transferring to his current ceremonial duties. David heard the comments but chose to ignore them, focusing instead on checking his rifle and adjusting his shooting position. He had learned long ago that responding to provocations rarely led to positive outcomes, and his current role required him to maintain the highest standards of professional behavior, both on and off duty. The mockery was nothing new. Many people assumed that ceremonial guards were simply parade soldiers, with no real combat capabilities. The group's commentary grew louder as Marcus began explaining to anyone within earshot why modern military training was inferior to the tactical courses he had attended as a civilian. His expensive rifle, custom-built with the latest technology, represented thousands of pounds worth of equipment that he believed automatically made him superior to any regular soldier. Other club members began to take notice of the situation, some feeling uncomfortable with the obvious attempt to embarrass a fellow member who was quietly minding his own business. A few of the older military veterans recognized something in David's calm demeanor that suggested there might be more to his background than his detractors assumed. David completed his equipment check and moved to the firing line, his movements economical and precise in a way that spoke of extensive training and muscle memory developed through countless hours of practice. He selected a standard military rifle from the club's inventory rather than bringing his own custom equipment, a choice that prompted more derisive laughter from Marcus's group. The range safety officer called for a ceasefire to change targets, and Marcus seized the opportunity to approach David directly. "I say, friend," he began with barely concealed arrogance, "you might want to consider some proper training courses. I've been shooting competitively for years, and I can tell you that technique matters more than anything else in precision shooting." David looked up from his rifle with polite attention, his expression neutral, despite the obvious condescension in the other man's voice. "Thank you for the advice," he replied quietly, his tone giving away nothing about his true feelings or background. "I appreciate your concern for my shooting development." The diplomatic response seemed to embolden Marcus, who interpreted David's restraint as confirmation of his own superiority. He gestured grandly toward his expensive equipment setup and began launching into a detailed explanation of why civilian tactical training was superior to standard military instruction, his voice carrying to every corner of the range as the range safety officer prepared to resume live firing. Other members positioned themselves where they could observe what was clearly developing into an informal competition between the loud businessman and the quiet soldier. The atmosphere had shifted from casual weekend shooting to something more charged with tension and expectation. David returned his attention to his rifle, making final adjustments with the kind of methodical precision that comes from years of training in situations where accuracy can mean the difference between life and death. His calm exterior gave no indication that he was about to demonstrate exactly why his current ceremonial duties represented only a small fraction of his military capabilities. The range safety officer announced the resumption of firing, and Marcus positioned himself at the firing line with theatrical flourish, adjusting his expensive scope and making a show of his shooting preparations. His friends gathered behind him, offering loud encouragement and predictions about his performance, while continuing to make disparaging comments about David's modest equipment and assumed inexperience. Marcus took his first shot at the 100-meter target, achieving a respectable grouping that drew applause from his supporters. He fired several more rounds with deliberate precision, creating a tight cluster near the center of the target that demonstrated genuine skill and extensive practice with his custom rifle. His performance was indeed impressive by civilian standards, and he turned to his audience with obvious satisfaction. "Now that's how it's done," Marcus announced loudly, making sure his voice carried to David's position. "Proper equipment, proper training, and years of dedication to the craft. Not something you learn during basic military training or ceremonial duties." His friends nodded approvingly, several making pointed comments about the difference between real marksmanship and simple military qualification shooting. David had been quietly observing Marcus's performance, noting both the man's genuine skill and his need for public validation. The businessman was undoubtedly a competent marksman, but his technique showed the characteristics of someone who had learned to shoot in controlled environments with unlimited time and perfect conditions. There was nothing wrong with such training, but it represented only one aspect of firearms proficiency. When the range safety officer indicated it was David's turn, he moved to the firing line with understated efficiency. His approach was markedly different from Marcus's theatrical preparations. Instead of elaborate adjustments and prolonged setup rituals, David simply settled into position. With the fluid economy of movement that comes from muscle memory, developed under stress, the assembled onlookers watched with varying degrees of interest as David assumed his firing position. To the casual observer, his stance appeared conventional enough, but several of the military veterans in the crowd recognized subtle differences in his posture and grip that suggested training beyond standard military marksmanship programs. Marcus and his friends positioned themselves where they could observe David's shooting, their expectations clearly set for a mediocre performance that would validate their earlier assessments. "Watch this," Marcus whispered loudly to his companions. "I predict he'll be lucky to keep his shots on the paper at this distance." Ceremonial guards spend their time learning parade formations. It's not combat shooting. David's breathing settled into the controlled rhythm that had been drilled into him during years of advanced tactical training. His finger found the trigger with familiar precision, and his focus narrowed to encompass only the essential elements of sight alignment, breathing control, and trigger squeeze. The background noise of commentary and speculation faded from his consciousness. The first shot surprised everyone present with its sharp, controlled report. David's rifle had barely seemed to move, and his recovery to the ready position was so smooth it appeared almost mechanical. Marcus stopped his commentary mid-sentence, suddenly realizing that the sound and characteristics of David's shot were different from what he had expected. When the target was examined, David's first bullet had struck dead center with surgical precision. The hole was perfectly placed in the 10-ring, demonstrating not just accuracy, but the kind of consistent shooting that comes from extensive training under pressure. The casual conversation among the onlookers died away as they realized they might be witnessing something unexpected. David fired his second shot with the same controlled precision, the rifle barely disturbing his position as the bullet followed virtually the same trajectory as the first. The target now showed two holes so close together they could barely be distinguished as separate impacts. The level of consistency was remarkable even by competitive shooting standards. Marcus's expression began to change from confident superiority to puzzled concern as he watched David's performance. This was not the mediocre shooting he had predicted, and the ease with which David was achieving such precision suggested a level of training that went far beyond basic military qualifications. The third, fourth, and fifth shots followed in steady succession, each one delivered with the same mechanical precision and minimal disturbance to David's shooting position. His breathing remained controlled, his trigger finger worked with metronomic consistency, and his recovery between shots was so smooth that observers could barely detect any movement of the EM's rifle. When the string of shots was complete, David saved his weapon and stepped back from the firing line with the same quiet efficiency he had shown throughout the exercise. There was no celebration, no commentary about his performance, and no apparent concern about the impressed silence that had fallen. Over the previously vocal crowd of observers, the target told the story that David's demeanor had refused to reveal. 5 shots had created a single ragged hole in the exact center of the bullseye, demonstrating a level of precision shooting that few marksmen ever achieve, even under ideal conditions. The stunned silence that followed David's shooting demonstration was broken only by the mechanical whirring of the target retrieval system. Marcus and his friends stared at the approaching target with expressions of disbelief, unable to reconcile what they were seeing with their assumptions about the quiet soldier's capabilities. An elderly club member named Colonel James Hartwell, a retired infantry officer with 40 years of military experience, stepped closer to examine David's target. His weathered hands held the paper steady as he counted the overlapping bullet holes, his expression growing more impressed with each moment of study. 5 shots, 1 hole, he announced to the gathered crowd. That's the kind of shooting I've only seen from very specialized units. Marcus's face had gone pale as the implications of David's performance began to sink in. His own respectable shooting, which had drawn such praise moments earlier, now seemed amateurish by comparison. The expensive equipment and years of weekend training that he had been so proud of had been completely overshadowed by a man using basic club equipment with effortless precision. David began cleaning his rifle with the same methodical approach he had shown throughout the shooting exercise. Apparently oblivious to the stir his performance had created among the other club members. Several people had approached to examine his target more closely, their conversations filled with technical speculation about the kind of training required to achieve such consistency. The range safety officer, a former Royal Marine named Sergeant Thompson, had witnessed thousands of shooting performances during his years at the club. He approached David with obvious respect, recognizing the hallmarks of truly elite marksmanship training. "That was extraordinary shooting," he said quietly. "I haven't seen precision like that since my days working with special reconnaissance units." Marcus finally found his voice, though it lacked the confident swagger that had characterized his earlier commentary. "I suppose you've had some advanced training," he said, his words more question than statement as he struggled to understand how he had so completely misjudged David's capabilities. David looked up from cleaning his rifle, his expression remaining politely neutral despite the obvious shift in the atmosphere around him. "I've had the benefit of some good instruction over the years," he replied, with characteristic understatement, neither confirming nor denying the speculation that was beginning to circulate among the observers. Colonel Hartwell had spent enough time around Special Forces personnel to recognize the signs of advanced military training. David's shooting technique, his movement patterns, and his understated response to the situation all pointed to a background that went far beyond ceremonial duties. "That level of precision suggests some very specialized training," the colonel observed. Carefully, the other club members had formed a loose circle around David's shooting position, their earlier casual attitude replaced by genuine respect for what they had witnessed. Several military veterans in the group were exchanging meaningful looks, recognizing elements of David's performance that spoke to training programs available only to elite units. Marcus's friends had grown noticeably quiet, their earlier laughter and commentary replaced by awkward silence as they realized how thoroughly their assumptions had been proven wrong. The expensive equipment and loud boasting that had seemed so impressive minutes earlier now felt embarrassing in the face of David's effortless demonstration of superior skill. David finished cleaning his rifle and began packing his equipment. With the same efficient movements he had displayed throughout the afternoon, his calm demeanor gave no indication that he was aware of the stir his shooting had created. Though several observers noted the practiced way he handled, his gear suggested extensive field experience. Young Tommy Morrison, a 17-year-old aspiring to join the military, gathered the courage to approach David with obvious admiration. "Sir, could you tell me what kind of training produces shooting like that? I've never seen anything like it, even in competitions," the teenager asked with genuine curiosity. David paused in his equipment packing and looked at the young man. With a slight smile, "Consistent practice and good fundamentals," he replied simply. "The most important thing is to focus on the basics and not get distracted by what other people are doing or saying." The answer was characteristically modest. But Colonel Hartwell and several other experienced military personnel in the crowd understood that such precision came from training, programs that went far beyond basic marksmanship instruction. The kind of shooting they had just witnessed was typically associated with counter-terrorism units and special reconnaissance forces. Marcus made one final attempt to salvage his wounded pride. Approaching David with what he hoped would appear as professional courtesy, "Perhaps you could give me some pointers about improving my technique," he said, his voice betraying the humiliation he felt at having been so thoroughly outclassed by someone he had dismissed as incompetent. David's response was gracious. Despite the earlier mockery he had endured, "You're already a skilled marksman," he said honestly. "Sometimes it's just a matter of finding the right approach for your particular needs and circumstances." The diplomatic answer revealed nothing about his own background while avoiding any embarrassment for the businessman, who had learned such a hard lesson about making assumptions. As David prepared to leave the shooting club, Sergeant Thompson approached him with a request that would change the entire dynamic of the afternoon. "Would you mind staying for a few more minutes?" the former Royal Marine asked respectfully. "We're about to start our monthly precision shooting competition, and after what I've just witnessed, I think the other competitors would benefit from seeing a proper demonstration." David hesitated, clearly preferring to maintain his low profile. But the genuine enthusiasm in the range officer's voice and the expectant faces of the gathered club members made declining seem churlish. "I suppose I could stay for a little while longer," he agreed quietly, setting his equipment bag back down with a slight sigh. The monthly competition typically drew the club's most serious marksmen, including several former military snipers and civilian competitors who had achieved national rankings. Word of David's extraordinary shooting had spread quickly through the facility, and competitors began gathering at the precision range with unusual excitement. About the day's event, Marcus found himself in the uncomfortable position of having to compete immediately after being so thoroughly outclassed by the man he had mocked. His expensive rifle and custom ammunition, which had seemed like such advantages earlier, now felt inadequate compared to David's demonstration of pure skill over equipment. The businessman's confidence had been badly shaken by the afternoon's revelations. The competition format was straightforward but challenging. 10 shots at varying distances from 100 to 300 meters, with scoring based on precision and consistency rather than speed. Most competitors required 20 to 30 minutes to complete their strings. Taking time to adjust their equipment and account for changing wind conditions, Colonel Hartwell had positioned himself where he could observe David's technique more closely, his experienced eye noting details that confirmed his growing suspicions about the quiet soldier's background. The way David read wind conditions, his natural adaptation to different shooting positions, and his economy of movement all suggested training from Britain's most elite military units. When David's turn came, he approached the firing line with the same understated efficiency he had shown earlier. But this time, several experienced marksmen were watching specifically for the subtle indicators that separated recreational shooters from combat-trained professionals. What they observed exceeded even their elevated expectations. David's performance at the longer ranges was even more impressive than his earlier demonstration. At 200 meters, his shots created a grouping that measured less than an inch, achieved with a speed that suggested he was barely taking time to aim. At 300 meters, where most competitors struggled with wind drift and bullet drop, David's bullets struck with the precision of a machine. The most telling moment came when a sudden gust of wind swept across the range just as David was preparing his 7th shot. While other competitors would have waited for conditions to stabilize, David made an instant adjustment and fired without hesitation. The bullet struck the center of the target despite the challenging conditions, demonstrating the kind of instinctive wind reading that comes only from extensive field experience. Sergeant Thompson stopped timing David's performance after the 8th shot, realizing that conventional competition rules didn't adequately account for someone with this level of training. "In 20 years of running competitions, I've never seen shooting like this," he announced to the assembled crowd. "This isn't recreational marksmanship. This is operational level precision." The other competitors had gathered behind the firing line to watch David complete his string, their own rivalry forgotten in the face of witnessing something truly exceptional. Even the most accomplished marksmen in the club were shaking their heads in amazement at the consistency and speed of David's performance. Marcus stood among the observers, his earlier arrogance completely dissolved by the reality of what he was witnessing. The man he had dismissed as a ceremonial guard was demonstrating shooting skills that surpassed anything he had seen in civilian competition or military demonstrations. The expensive equipment and weekend training courses that had been his pride now seemed embarrassingly inadequate. Young Tommy Morrison watched every movement with intense concentration. Understanding that he was receiving a masterclass in precision shooting from someone whose background clearly included the highest levels of military training, the teenager's notebook was filled with observations about David's technique, position, and approach to different shooting challenges as David completed his final shots. The assembled crowd had grown to include nearly every member present at the club that afternoon. Word had spread through the facility that something extraordinary was happening at the precision range, and even members who rarely showed interest in competitive shooting had come to witness the demonstration. The final score, when calculated, showed David had achieved a perfect score while completing the course in less than half the time typically required by even the most accomplished competitors. His performance had redefined what the club members thought was possible in terms of precision shooting under pressure. The applause that erupted from the gathered crowd was spontaneous and sustained, with even the most competitive members of the club acknowledging that they had witnessed something truly extraordinary. David accepted the appreciation with his characteristic modesty, but Colonel Hartwell could see that the afternoon's events had pushed the young soldier beyond his comfort zone regarding public attention. Marcus approached David with genuine humility, his earlier arrogance replaced by sincere respect and obvious embarrassment about his previous behavior. "I owe you a profound apology," he said, extending his hand. "I made assumptions that were completely wrong, and I'm ashamed of my conduct earlier. Your shooting is at a level I didn't know existed outside of military legends." David accepted the handshake graciously, his response revealing the character that had allowed him to endure the earlier mockery without retaliation. "No apology necessary," he said simply. "We all make judgments based on limited information. The important thing is that everyone here shares a genuine appreciation for marksmanship and military service." Sergeant Thompson had been making phone calls during the competition, and he returned with news that would further illuminate David's background. "I've just spoken with an old mate who works in military records," he announced to the immediate group. Without violating any operational security, he confirmed that Corporal Thompson here has some very interesting entries in his service jacket. The range officer's revelation prompted a new wave of speculation among the club members, with several veterans nodding knowingly as pieces of the puzzle began fitting together. David's shooting performance, his movement patterns, and his understated responses all aligned with what they knew about Britain's most elite special forces units. Colonel Hartwell had served long enough to recognize when someone was trying to maintain operational discretion, and he quietly moved the conversation away from specific unit identifications. Whatever his background, the retired officer said diplomatically, "We've all been privileged to witness truly exceptional marksmanship today. Some training speaks for itself without requiring detailed explanations." The club's monthly newsletter editor, Mrs. Patricia Williams, approached David with a request to feature his performance in the next issue. "This is the kind of shooting that inspires young people to pursue military service," she explained. "Would you be willing to share some thoughts about the importance of proper training and dedication?" David considered the request carefully, understanding that any publicity could complicate his current duties as a Queen's Guard. "Perhaps we could focus on the broader message about not underestimating people based on appearances," he suggested, "and the importance of supporting all members of the military community, regardless of their current assignments." The afternoon had transformed from a routine recreational shooting session into an impromptu lesson about respect, assumptions, and the hidden depths that exist within the military community. Several club members commented that they would remember this day as a reminder never to judge fellow service members based on superficial impressions. Tommy Morrison had filled his notebook with observations and was clearly inspired by what he had witnessed. "Sir," he asked David, "what advice would you give to someone hoping to achieve that level of shooting proficiency?" The teenager's question reflected the aspirations of several younger members who had been motivated by the demonstration. David's answer was thoughtful and practical, reflecting his understanding of the long journey required to develop elite-level skills. "Start with solid fundamentals and practice them consistently," he advised. "Find good instructors who understand both the technical and mental aspects of precision shooting. Most importantly, never stop learning and never assume you know everything." The conversation that followed revealed more about David's philosophy than his specific background. He spoke about the importance of continuous training, the value of learning from failures, the need for humility in all aspects of military service. His insights resonated with both experienced veterans and aspiring service members in the audience. As the formal gathering began to disperse, Marcus made one final gesture that demonstrated how completely the afternoon had changed his perspective. He approached David with his expensive custom rifle and offered to let him examine it, genuinely curious about how someone with such advanced training would evaluate civilian equipment. David handled the rifle with obvious expertise, noting its quality while offering tactful suggestions about modifications that might improve its field reliability. His comments revealed knowledge of equipment testing under extreme conditions that went far beyond recreational shooting experience. The sun was beginning to set as David finally prepared to leave the club. But the impact of the afternoon's events would resonate far beyond that single day. Several members had already begun making plans to invite friends and family to hear David speak about military service and the importance of supporting all members of the armed forces community. Word of the day's events would spread through military and civilian shooting communities, becoming a legendary story about the dangers of making assumptions and the importance of respecting all service members, regardless of their current assignments. David's demonstration had become a powerful reminder that true expertise often comes in humble packages. 6 months after the legendary shooting demonstration at Blackheath Military Club, David found himself standing once again in his red tunic and bearskin hat outside Buckingham Palace. But the experience had fundamentally changed how both he and others viewed ceremonial duties. Word of his shooting performance had spread through military channels, earning him respect from colleagues who now understood that ceremonial postings often concealed extraordinary operational backgrounds. The shooting club had established an annual precision shooting award in David's honor, recognizing both exceptional marksmanship and the kind of character that handles success with humility. Marcus Whitman had become one of the award's strongest supporters, using his business connections to fund advanced training opportunities for promising young marksmen who demonstrated both skill and proper military bearing. Colonel Hartwell had worked quietly behind the scenes to ensure that David's story reached appropriate military leadership channels, helping to dispel misconceptions about the caliber of personnel assigned to ceremonial duties. Senior officers had begun recognizing that units like the Queen's Guard often served as temporary assignments for highly trained soldiers transitioning. Between operational deployments, the club's membership had grown significantly following news coverage of the extraordinary shooting demonstration. With many new members specifically hoping to learn from David's example, Sergeant Thompson had instituted monthly training sessions focused on the fundamentals that David had emphasized, creating a more serious training environment that attracted dedicated students of marksmanship. Tommy Morrison had followed David's advice about consistent practice and proper fundamentals, eventually earning a place at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. The teenager credited his inspiration to that afternoon at the shooting club, where he had learned that true expertise combined technical skill with character and humility. Mrs. Williams's newsletter article about the shooting demonstration had been reprinted in military publications around the world, becoming a widely cited example of why service members should never be underestimated based on their current assignments. The story had resonated particularly strongly with Special Forces communities, who recognized the challenges of transitioning to more visible but less operational roles. David continued his weekend visits to the shooting club, but now found himself in the role of informal instructor for members seeking to improve their precision shooting skills. His teaching methods emphasized the same fundamentals he had learned during his years with elite units, though he continued to maintain discretion about the specific details of his operational background. The relationship between David and Marcus had evolved into an unlikely friendship based on mutual respect for military service and dedication to marksmanship excellence. Marcus had used his business success to support veteran programs and had become a vocal advocate for recognizing the diverse talents within the UHL Terry community. A year after the shooting demonstration, David received orders for a new assignment that would allow him to return to more operational duties with a specialized counterterrorism unit. His time with the Queen's Guard had provided valuable experience in public relations and ceremonial protocols that would enhance his effectiveness in sensitive operations requiring interaction with civilian authorities. The farewell gathering at the shooting club drew members from across London's military community, with representatives from multiple units coming to honor David's contributions to both marksmanship training and military-civilian relations. Speakers emphasized how his example had changed perceptions about ceremonial soldiers and the importance of recognizing excellence wherever it appears. David's brief remarks at the farewell event reflected the same humility and wisdom that had characterized his response to the original shooting demonstration. He spoke about the honor of serving in any military capacity and the importance of supporting fellow service members regardless of their current assignments or public visibility. The legacy of that afternoon at Blackheath Military Club extended far beyond a single shooting demonstration. Training programs at multiple facilities had adopted David's emphasis on fundamentals over expensive equipment. Military leadership had revised policies to better recognize the diverse expertise within ceremonial units. Most importantly, countless individuals had learned valuable lessons about not judging others based on superficial appearances. Marcus continued to tell the story of David's shooting demonstration to business associates and friends, using it as an example of how easily people can underestimate others and the importance of treating everyone with respect. The businessman had become a changed person, more thoughtful about his assumptions and more appreciative of the sacrifices made by military personnel. The shooting club installed a permanent display commemorating the day that a quiet Queen's Guard had redefined what members thought was possible in precision marksmanship. The exhibit included David's target from that memorable afternoon, along with information about the diverse backgrounds and capabilities of ceremonial military units. Years later, veterans would still gather at the club to share the story with new members, ensuring that the lessons learned that day would continue inspiring future generations of marksmen and military personnel. David's demonstration had become more than just an impressive display of shooting skill. It had evolved into a lasting reminder about respect, humility, and the extraordinary capabilities that often exist beneath ordinary appearances. The quiet soldier who had endured mockery with dignity and responded with grace had left an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed his remarkable performance, proving that true strength reveals itself not through boasting or intimidation, but through competence, character, and the courage to excel while remaining humble in success.